have a quorum?
Yes, Chair, we do have a quorum.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order of the Sandag Audit Committee, Friday, April 21st, 2021. And let the record reflect that we have a quorum. The first item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. Do I have any comments? Are there any, first off, are there any public comments on the meeting minutes?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Great. Any board member comments, or I'll entertain a motion to approve? Oh, does anybody?
Paul Dostart will make the motion.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and second. With that, could we have call for the vote, Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. For the city of Solana Beach, Chair Zito.
Zito votes yes.
Thank you. For the city of Lemon Grove, Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vice Chair.
Vice Chair, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat your vote? You cut out there.
Oh, Vice Chair. Vasquez, yes.
Thank you very much. Public member Paul Dostart.
Dostart is yes.
Thank you very much. Public member Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
Thank you. And public member Robert Monson.
Monson, yes.
Thank you very much. And that does pass unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on, I guess I'll make one quick comment is just for myself, is just as a heads up. I don't know what happened, but about 10 minutes ago, I lost power to my entire house for 1 minute. So if I suddenly disappear, it's nothing that any of you guys said. And if that happens, we'll just let the fully capable vice chair take over, but hopefully it won't. Just wanted to give you that heads up. I have no idea what happened, but my whole house went dark. Anyway, so moving on, we will go ahead and take comments. Do we have any public comments of members that wish to speak?
Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Great, thank you. How about board member comments? Are there any board members that wish to say something? I see no hands up at this point. With that, we'll go ahead and move on to the executive director's report. Hassan.
Thank you, Councilmember Zito. Committee members, good afternoon. I'll update you on a few things. I know you have a long agenda, so I'll make it short. You probably saw it in the newspaper. Wednesday night, we released our notice of preparation for the Central Mobility Hub. It's a big milestone. As you know, September 2019, the board approved the recommendation of the Airport Connectivity Subcommittee. We're definitely looking to connect wherever the hub is going to be to the airport, hopefully underground. We're looking at two locations for the hub. One is at the NAVWAR, which we're working with our partners from the Navy. And the other one is at the Intermodal Transportation Center east of the airport. We will be making a lot of workshops. I encourage you to get involved. This is an exciting project. This is a project that's going to transform, I believe, the region. The regional transportation plan today, we presented one more thing about 5 big moves, and that's on social equity. I hope Councilmember Zito and Mayor Vasquez enjoyed the discussion. There's some of the statements that I hope next time our leadership would say something to stop these kind of stuff. But other than that, I thought there is a healthy public policy debate taking place in the development of the Regional Transportation Plan. Very good news from California Air Resources Board. We received a letter of approval for our methodology on the 2021 Regional Transportation Plan. That's very significant. The Senate Bill 375 require that we get this approval. The letter reads, and I just quote one sentence, based on our review, staff believes there are no aspects of the submitted technical methodology that would yield inaccurate estimates of greenhouse gas emissions and does not have further changes to suggest. I'm grateful for number of staff who worked really hard on this. Elisa Arias, Antoinette Mayer, Tuweri, Fabiola, Phil Tram, Alison Wood, Wu Sun, Rick Carey, Zing Wang, Crystal Ayala, Eva Sanchez, Susan Friedman, and Samantha Folke. And to say the least, these are amazing people who got this approved so we can move forward. Another good news, we received another California Energy Commission grant for $200,000 to develop $200,000 to develop blueprint for zero emission vehicle infrastructure. This is important and consistent with our discussion. Sandak has been successful in securing more than $1.1 million in the last few years. I think we did, as an agency, we did really well in the last years when it comes to bringing federal and state dollars. Alta Mesa 2 border crossing is moving as planned. Very soon, we're going to be inviting you as members of the audit committee to, when we can do it safely, to actually get on a tour to see close and personal the tremendous work that's going on at the border. At Delmar Bluff, we spoke earlier, the work continuing. As I said, we will be done in July. I'm hoping after the work this weekend, trains will go a little bit faster, and the study to look at long-term solution for the bluff is underway, and hopefully we'll have recommendation to the board shortly. The Mid-Coast on budget, on schedule. Yesterday, Mayor Gloria and Mayor Blakespeare were at UCSD on the opening of the station. I think it's wonderful to see that final touches before this beautiful red cars start getting on this line this summer and later open to the public. Digital divide and smart city workshop. We're trying to figure out how to minimize the digital divide, especially for low-income communities. Yesterday, we had a great workshop, attended more than 100 people. I want to thank Antoinette Meyer of our staff who's doing the work. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Oops, I was on mute. Thank you, Hassan. Francesca, do we have any public comment?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Thank you. How about any board members? Any board member comments or questions? Seeing no hands up, we will then move on to item number 4, Mary's update.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Just a real brief update here because I'll be sharing a lot of the discussion on the following items. I did want to share that we're moving quickly and working with HR to get the audit position filled, and hopefully in July with the new fiscal year and a new audit plan that I will bring to you next month. We'll have our staff fully staffed. I'm hopeful of that. Both the vacant position that just became vacant and also the new position once the budget's passed, as well as the intern positions. Other than that, I'll chat more detail on a couple of the items following. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any public member comments or questions, Francesca?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Any board members comments or questions? Seeing no hands up, we will move on to item 5, the recommended 21-22 performance measures. I believe this was tasked to Stuart and Bob. Which one of you gets the pleasure of kicking it off?
Chair, I get to be the one to kick it off.
Awesome.
We're going to be, Stuart and I will be splitting kind of the topics up. I'm going to kick us off and talk about the performance measures that with a lot of input from Mary, we have come up and presented to you, and then Stuart will go ahead and discuss salary considerations. So let's start off with the performance measures. I'm hoping that you all were able to see the attachment where we have the performance measures that we are recommending. A couple of points that I want to bring out before we get too far into the discussion. One was as far as the timeline that these performance measures will cover. They will obviously cover fiscal year 2021 to 22, but they're also going to cover about 6 months, six of the current months, starting January 21 up through June 30th of 21. We had a lot of discussion between the three of us about that. And Mary's doing a lot of work that these performance measures would be tied to. So we thought it would be best to have that 6-month period covered as well. Secondly, we really sought to make these performance measures as clear as possible so that anyone could pick these up and understand what the goal is that Mary and her staff are going to be held to. And so I think we've reached those two goals for these performance measures. Now, as far as attachment 1 is concerned, we're recommending 6 performance measures. They focus primarily on competency of staff, efficiency and effectiveness of the office and of Mary's operation. I'm going to kind of go one by one. I'm not going to get into a big discussion of them because I'm assuming that you've all seen them, but just to kind of, for the benefit of the public, to just talk generally about each one of those goals. And Mary, feel free to jump in if I've left something out that you think need to be talked about. So let's start with the first one. The first one is professional continued education. Again, licenses, certifications, all have CPE or continuing practice education that's required to maintain those. Certain standards, GAGAS primarily, because that's primarily what Mary and her office works under. GAGAS specifically has requirements for all auditors to maintain a certain amount of education. So they keep up with standards, they keep up with all the latest techniques that are a part of auditing. That's the first performance measure. Again, it's aligned to, as I said before, professional auditing standards. It's aligned to the independent auditor's own measures that she's placed on herself as well as staff. The on target is 90%. Exceeds target would be 100%. That would mean that everyone on her staff has met the required standards. The second one is percentage of planned audits versus number of engagements conducted. And I'm going to go down to the third one because they're kind of tied in to the critical piece here. That third one is the budgeted versus actual audit hours per engagement. Both those are really tied in to the audit plan for fiscal year 22, which Mary will be presenting to the audit committee, I believe in May. Is that correct, Mary? Okay.
Yes.
And so it's important that we tie those two goals in with that audit plan. It covers the period. Again, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. The audit plan will have a certain number of engagements that Mary has determined she's going to focus on for this fiscal year coming up. And then it will compare the number of actual engagements that have been completed at the end of the year. The target is 80%. The exceeds would be 85%. The third, budgeted versus actual. Again, I think that's somewhat self-explanatory. In Mary's audit plan, she always has a budget attached to each engagement. That's following standards in developing, and when the auditor develops their plan, is they need to attach a budget to each individual engagement. And then it's simply comparing that budget against what they actually spent. And this really, again, as I said before, focuses on efficiency of Mary's department and their individual auditors, as well as Mary herself. Again, the target is 80% and exceeds is 85%. I want to make one statement when it comes to the percentages. Having been a chief audit executive in my old life, these percentages I believe are reasonable. You want stretch goals, but you also want to make sure that they are attainable, they're reasonable. And I can tell you from my experience, because I had these same goals, is the 80% for a target is very reasonable. I just wanted to make that statement. The fourth performance measure is really entitled Percentage of OIPA's Key Goals Achieved. This is really, I believe, and Mary, this is where I'm going to probably have you want to jump in and provide a little bit more explanation. But one of the requirements of Mary's office is that she needs to focus on risk assessment. And one of the, well, I don't know if it would be a standard, I'm trying to think back, but one of the key points for an auditor is it's not just about auditing controls and auditing process. It's about informing, educating management on risk and performing a risk assessment. And that's really what this goal is focusing in, from the aspect of management's participation in classes, in meetings that Mary seeks to set up. So Mary, did I kind of touch base with this goal correctly?
Yes, you actually, you nailed it. So it's reaching out and having those annual risk discussions, like I did with you, Chair Zito, having them with the audit committee members, the governing board, which is the board members, management, and having all kind of a full realm of consideration about potential risk out there, and then taking in that information and looking at it from an audit perspective. It's also, the second part of that is also providing outreach and guidance and training, again, from an audit perspective on how to improve controls and how to bring efficiencies on policies and such as that. So that's really what that's about, is the participation and my engagement with the board, management, and the audit committee.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So as far as the target that Mary would be pointing towards is 70% participation of board members, management, staff in those kinds of discussions. Exceeds would be to 80% participation. The fifth measurable performance goal is public transparency and accountability. This is where I think she's really focusing in on status of recommendations. That's what I'll call it. Working with management to determine what recommendations, both the internal ones as well as external recommendations, have been fulfilled, or what their status is. And then developing a report that will be reported or sent out to the board and the audit committee, so that those two groups are kept informed as to where we stand as far as recommendations. We all know it's great to audit, but the important part is the recommendations that come out of those audits and getting them implemented. And so that's what this is dealing with. Again, the target date is 100%. And I believe there we're not talking about 100% implementation of recommendations.
Right.
We're talking about 100% of reporting out on the status of those recommendations.
Right.
That's how I think we've interpreted that. The exceeds would also be 100%. You obviously can't go higher than 100%. The sixth, which I will tell you just again from my previous life as an auditor, I think this is probably, if I had to prioritize any of these measures, this would be the one that I would prioritize the most. It's the most important. My feeling, and this is just Bob's opinion, is that an auditor will not be effective and will not add value if he or she has not been able to develop relationships with management and communicates with them. It doesn't mean that they're not going to disagree. Sometimes it means you're going to have to agree to disagree and move on. What this performance measure is really focusing in on is those development of working relationships and communication while Mary still maintains her independence as an auditor. This is going to be fulfilled through a performance survey similar to what she went through this last year. And from the results of that, we were able to develop a satisfactory or a percentage that would represent satisfactory performance. That would be the target that she would be going for. Is satisfactory or 70%. Exceeds would be exceeding 80% of satisfactory, if that makes sense. Mary, do you want to add anything about that?
No, that's
Okay.
pretty much it. You nailed it. Again, it's about building relationships, having good open communication with both management, the board, and Sandex staff, as well as how we communicate information to the audit committee and how it moves from the audit committee to the board.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
So those are the 6 performance measures that we would recommend that the audit committee approve and that Mary will be held to when it comes to her evaluation at the end of the fiscal year 22. With that, I'll open this up to questions, further discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I guess what we'll do here is we'll take some questions and but not discussion. I don't want to have discussion at this point, just to make sure there's an opportunity for public input first. But we'll go to some questions for you at this time. So Paul, I see your hand raised. Is that a question?
Yes, I want to commend the committee for a thorough job. And I'm always inclined to go with whatever a committee recommends because I think they've studied it and so on. The one concern I would have, Bob and Stu, is where you set the on target and the exceeds both at 100. This is public transparency and accountability. This is a problem, I recognize, because we do expect that as members of the public. My only concern is, let me tell you where I would go. Did you consider having the on target at 95% or something, so that in the event there's a oversight or something, that's good faith, not not an intentional withholding, but a good faith thing, and somebody's, you get a press account or somebody says, well, they're hiding this in the locked file cabinet or whatever they'd say, that we don't ding the IPA because they're doing their job, even though there is a wrongful assertion of lack of transparency. I raise that as a concern, not really a suggestion, but to put it out in discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. As usual, a very good question. I don't know that we really considered that. I think it's a good point to think about, though. Mary, would you like to add anything?
I think Paul was right on target. I kind of agree with that. I didn't consider that either. And in our discussions, we just said, we'll get it done. But he's right. Something can come up, and then I would be held to that regardless. So
Yeah.
I would agree with Paul.
I agree to a certain extent. Stuart, is there anything you'd like to add in?
Yeah, I appreciate Paul's comment. And, I recall that when we had discussions about this, there are some elements here that really are kind of in the all or none category, right? Like, for example, the notion of having the fraud, waste, abuse hotline reports. I mean, that's just kind of like an all or none. It happens, or, right? So there's a little bit of some complexity to, trying to break it down into the component pieces. And, so if the view is that 100% is a little, unfair in a sense for the reasons Paul referenced, then sure, yeah, I'd be happy to consider. I think the language is somewhat more intentional than it is, bottom line-ish. So I would have hoped that's encompassed there, but make sure that there's no doubt, softening that at least target percentage might be helpful. I see that.
I agree with that. I like that. So we can make that change if you'd like, if that's okay with you, Mary.
Absolutely.
We can make it at 95%.
You better
Yes.
get David Zito's comment
Yeah,
here,
well-
because now he's going to be charged with being the chair of a committee that has a target goal of almost honest.
I know that, and we'll get to that. I mean, I guess I can comment on this particular item. The only comment I would make is at least my expectation, and maybe there are measures in there that are implied and not listed. But in general, with this type of exercise, you list out the measure that you're going to use to score the employee on. And in this case, if you look at what's listed in there, we're going to publish the documents to the web page. We're going to do these actions. It's going to be difficult for someone to come up and say, oh, you're not being transparent because you're not doing X. Well, we chose not to measure Mary by X. So I don't think in this particular instance, having 100% is unreasonable, because we're saying this is how we're measuring that 100%. And I actually think that along those lines, you could almost have an exceeds goal that was over 100%, meaning that through the year, the IPA's office might discover there are other additional ways that we could be more transparent. Let's do those additional activities. And those would be things that we could give quote unquote extra credit for at the end of the year. So that's kind of my take on it at this point as well. But
I like extra credit.
All right.
Okay.
Anyway,
All right.
not particularly, but I also want to make sure, I don't see any hands up on the public yet, but I also want to make sure we get any public input if we're going to have it as well before we start forming decisions, which was a question thing. So I've noted that as something to talk about when we get to this. Did we want to make I'm assuming we'll go on to Stuart's presentation.
Yeah. And that was a
public
and
input and discussion.
And Chair, that was a question I was going to kind of throw out, if we
Right.
wanted to wait for any kind of motions, further discussions.
Yeah,
on
I think
both.
we should, just so we get all the public input at once,
Yeah.
should there be any, let's go ahead and do Stuart's presentation, and then I can take public input, and then we can go on to discussion. But I will want to talk about them separately, obviously.
Okay. All right. So at this point then, I'll turn it over to Stuart so that he can talk about the next.
Thanks. Before I proceed, I just want to ask, and I don't know, maybe this is a question actually for Amber Lynn. There were some materials prepared that did not make the website. I don't know if those were separately provided to committee members. I guess I'd have a question if, from a Brown Act perspective, they were sent to committee members but are not on the public website, if we need to publish them now so that we're.
Certainly, we can. If there are additional materials, we can go ahead and distribute those to the members right now. We also may have the option to show them on the screen, and then we can make them part of the record of today's meeting as well. And that would be compliant with the Brown Act.
Got it. Okay. So if those have not been distributed to members, I wonder if we could, if we're prepared to put them on the screen. It was our intention, frankly, for them to have been included in the materials. I thought we met the deadlines. I apologize if there was any reason I was at fault for not making that happen, but it might be hard to follow if we don't have those at least on the screen. Is that gonna be-
Stuart, you met the deadline. The information was forwarded, and I know that they were kind of really busy trying to get other agendas organized as well. And so we did distribute them to the audit committee members. But if possible, Francesca, do you have that document that you could share on the screen or bring up?
I believe so. Let me try and pull it up right now.
Okay, great.
I just always want to make sure I'm not doing anything. And,
See, now that's the 100% transparency problem
There you
right
go.
there. We just, right, it couldn't,
So in
how did we make that happen so well, huh?
but
if
for sake of
necessary,
time,
I can probably share as well.
for sake of time, I'm happy just to start because I have just a little bit of some background comments, but hopefully those materials will be available in a minute. Just, for context, obviously a salary study is the preferred approach for doing this type of thing, but we weren't resourced to do one. So what Bob and I, in conjunction with Mary, and really big shout out to Melissa Kofeld, who's immensely helpful and responsive to our data requests and provided a lot of much needed background and perspective. What we intend to do really is just to, based on what is available, pull together some data that we hope would offer perspective on where we should, or the board in its final determination might want to come out on the extended contract for Mary. So just by way of background.
Is this what you wanted to share, Stuart?
Yes, exactly. So that's the first slide note, which I'll come to in just one second.
Okay.
So people may or may not recall, but after AB 805 was passed, even before the audit committee was constituted, SANDAG commissioned the salary study, and this is the first page or the cover of that salary study, for a potential IPA position to help the board decide whether to fulfill the Act requirements either with an in-house capability or use an outside audit firm to fulfill the requirements of the Act. So as you can see here in February 2018, an outside firm was in fact delivered a report which did a salary review. You'll notice that the report's dated February 2018. This is over a full year prior to the start of Mary's first contract. Again, because it was more for scoping the cost of this broadly, not specifically for compensation purposes. But then if we can go to the next slide in this, you can see that there is a list of comparable entities. Oops, sorry, there you go, thank you. You can see that there's a list on this page, and then also it follows over to a second page, a list of comparable entities that the CPS firm that did the report reviewed for purposes of this assessment. And again, this is just trying to use this as a reference, right, for where the salary might have started from. The median that's shown on the page 15 of this report, which is if you scroll down,
There's two here.
Right, there you go. So the median there, that actually, maybe somewhat coincidentally or not, actually conforms pretty closely to Mary Stardy's salary of $195,000, okay? Then if you go to the next page, if you could, part of that report also had a different slice, which looked at comparable entities, but as you can see, broke them down by size. And the point here is that if you look at the billion-dollar agencies, and SANDAG certainly is one, one could reasonably argue that, again, going back in time, a starting place might have been the, it's not multiplied out here, but if you look at that higher billion-dollar monthly number of the 17,000 plus, that translates into like a 2,013 annual compensation. And the reason why we're doing this is not to relitigate what her first contract should or shouldn't have been, but rather in the absence of a salary study, we thought it would be reasonable to say, what was the starting place? And then let's look at what a reasonable growth in compensation over time to bring us to today might be. So next, if we can go to the next page in the presentation, you'll see there's a spreadsheet that has a lot of information. I'm not sure how well it's showing on your screen, but let me walk you through it for just a brief explanation. The shaded numbers up at the top there are kind of the bottom line, which I'll come back to in a second. The unshaded numbers below that shaded area are all labeled backup data. And those are excerpts from Sandag's board-approved salary tables for a range of relevant categories for the past few fiscal years. And now the fiscal 22 data isn't in there because my understanding is it's still in formulation and we didn't have access to the drafts of that. But now let me walk through the numbers in the shaded box. If you can see line 1, that shows the actual IPA salary, which has been unchanged at the $195,000 for the past 3 years. Line 2 shows the percentage increases in the Sandag board-approved salary table for the past 3 fiscal years for the IPA category, which is category 33, shown in line 5. Now, I just want to note, we haven't seen any of the underlying support related to those adjustments, but everybody should take comfort by the fact that they were all reviewed and approved by the Sandag board in each of those respective years. So there shouldn't be any questions about the governance process surrounding that. Line 3 shows the initial CPS salary study median grown at the actual minimum percentage change of the Sandag salary tables for Mary's category. And you can see where that comes out as of fiscal 2021. And then line 4 shows that second ERI salary study median for the billion-dollar sized agencies, back at the beginning of the period, and similarly grown at the Sandag salary table rate of growth. And so you can see at the end point of the data that we have, and this, to be clear, this is prior to taking into account any contemplated increase in the salary tables for fiscal 22 over 21, that suggests, if you agree that this approach in the absence of a salary study is reasonable, that suggests that a range of 236 to 257 at this point is kind of like a credible range, okay? So there's that. There's actually one other thing that I'd like to raise that's called out on this spreadsheet that came up to us in the course of doing this review. And you'll notice the line 5 of the spreadsheet. The IPA is grouped in the salary category 33, which includes director level 2 individuals. Now on line 8, you'll see that in fiscal 2020, there was a new category 34 was created for the new position of chief financial officer. And on line 9, you can see that all along there's been a category 35, which includes 5 additional chief level individuals and the general counsel, all of whom report to the executive director. Now, I want to be clear, with complete and total respect for the executive director's authority to manage the Sandag organizational chart, but for sake of the very unique financial and risk management roles, both of the IPA and the chief financial officer of Sandag, we believe the IPA and the CFO positions should at least be considered to have the standing, both in substance and in perception, as the other senior-most members of Sandag who report either to the executive director or to the board. And again, just respectfully suggest that separate from the salary specific, the numbers on the page, but just rather from the standing and the categorization, that is a separate matter. People consider recategorizing Mary and the CFO into that category 35. So that's the work that we were able to pull together, which we hope provides some useful perspective in this discussion about what kind of a salary range we should be talking about for Mary's extension contract, and happy to discuss or take questions.
Okay, well, it's going to be a little challenging for me to do that while sharing, so I'll stop now. I don't know if Francesca's found it in case we want to look at it again. But first, are there any questions? Again, not discussion, but questions of Stuart, and thanks for the presentation, Stuart, as well, at this point. And I see no questions. Francesca, have you seen any public comments on this particular item?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Okay, so we don't have any public
Yeah.
comment.
Chair Zito?
Yeah.
This is Hassan. I just, a couple of comments, and this is not on any specifics, but since I started,
So, yeah, Hassan, can I make one comment though?
Yeah.
I do want to split this up into two discussions, one about the evaluation and one about the salary. So I was
Okay.
going to go back to the evaluation criteria right now. If you want to make some discussion comments on the salary, maybe we could wait till we actually all get to the salary component, if that's okay.
that's fair.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So at this point, I do want to go back to, and so, sorry, Francesca, since we had no questions, go back to the actual evaluation criteria. I don't know if we want that shared for this discussion purposes. We did have the one comment about the public transparency and accountability being 100%. I am interested in hearing more about that. I had one comment in addition to make myself, which is on the communication and relationship development, which I agree with the comments they're made that this is probably one of the most important items. I do think we should add in something in there about not only doing an independent review or survey, but actually coming up with an action plan that is published and documented with respect to what steps are taken to address items that come out of that survey, of which some of them may be, maybe simply be, we're not going to do anything about this. We feel that this issue is not that serious, and that's okay. I mean, I just want to make sure that the information that comes out of that survey, that there are actionable results that we make progress against as well. So we understand that surveys, again, if you measure yourself but you don't do anything with the measurement, it's not very useful. So I'm curious about thoughts on that as well. So if anybody has any, I think earlier, we can, if anybody has any other things to add, I think it's great work, and I thank you guys for tackling that, particularly Stuart and Bob. But I also want to make sure we wrap our heads around it. And if anybody has other comments, otherwise curious if any other board members want to talk up about the 100% versus 95%. Or once again, I also think we can bump over 100% for things that are created during the year that aren't in these measures as well. Paul, I see your hands up.
Thank you, sir. Having raised the problem, maybe I would solve my own problem.
Okay.
And it could be by leaving it at 100, 100.
Yeah.
But putting into the text discussion that there would be no intentional failures to post, for example, and then dealing with and adding a sentence that says something like, and there would be no disclosures or posting of information that's required to be kept by law to be confidential. So we keep it at 100, but we just state the standard to be no intentional non-publication and no, whether intentional or unintentional, disclosure of confidential information. And then I think we solved the problem that I at least was concerned about.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other comments, thoughts?
Yes, this is Raquel Vasquez. I
Hey.
just want to say, oh, hi, how are you?
Pretty good. Sorry if you were raising your hand, I wasn't seeing it.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I did not raise my hand.
Okay, then I won't feel guilty, but thanks for jumping in. What do you have to add?
So no, I feel guilty. I just wanted to say that I was in agreement with Paul.
Okay.
And I think that would help to clarify everything. But also too, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Stuart and Bob for working on this. It's needed, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with this process.
Thank you.
Thank
Bob.
Chair Zito, I'm going to go back to a comment you made on the communication relationship. And I think if I understood you correctly, suggesting adding maybe an additional step, if you will, a action plan, as I think you put it, towards anything that come up from the survey. I think that's a great idea. And And we could certainly do that here because really with performance measures, when it doesn't meet the measure, you should be coming up with an action plan for the following year as to what you need to correct. Maybe there's nothing that needs to be corrected. It needs to be stated. So I like that idea myself. So
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Stuart, I see you're up.
Yes, thank you. I'd echo Bob's comment, Chair. I think the concept of an action plan makes perfect sense. I also just want to say I like Paul's elegant solution here, which I said earlier. A number of these things are, they're kind of all or none, or you just don't want to be on record as endorsing anything less than 100% transparency.
Right.
So, so to include some language that references, that if it's a little bit more intentional than the current language. The only thing I guess I would just want to point out, I wonder if we could live without the additional kind of complication of the referencing confidential, non-confidential. It starts getting into some other issues that, as we saw with the last audit report, there may be differences of points of view about requirements of disclosure and things of that nature. But in general, I really like the elegance of Paul's proposed solution.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's all the comments. Looking at the agenda, so does staff want, we have those two changes. Does staff want a motion on this that we vote on it, or is this just for feedback?
Chair, if I may, this is Amberlynn Deaton, legal counsel. The item today has been agendized really with two parts, and one of them is for the audit committee to consider adopting performance measures,
Right.
which it could do so through a motion today. And then the second part is to consider a recommendation to the board regarding a salary adjustment.
Awesome, thank you.
So that can be done as a single item, or the audit committee at your discretion could choose to split that into two votes.
Yeah, I would prefer to split it at this point. So if people if everyone's comfortable with the two changes that have been proposed, if they need clarity, I'd certainly entertain a motion to adopt those performance measures with those two changes, if anyone's so inclined.
So I'll go ahead and make the motion on the performance measures that they be adopted with the two changes. One under public transparency and accountability, the other one under communication and relationship, including those changes in there. That would be my motion.
Awesome, thanks.
And I'll second the motion. This is Raquel Vasquez.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez. We have a motion and a second. I see no further comment, although I will warn Stuart, he still has his hand up. I'm assuming that's left over. Thank you. With that, can you call for the vote, Francesca?
Thank you very much. Board Member Chair Zito.
Zito votes yes.
Thank you. Board Member Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vice Chair Vasquez, yes.
Thank you very much. Public Member Paul Dostart.
Dostart, yes.
Thank you. Public Member Stuart Halpern.
I would vote yes. If I could just ask Amberlynn, so we're voting on a motion that is somewhat subject to the trust we all have that certain changes will be made in the spirit in which the conversation took place. Is that a fair way to characterize this?
That's correct. The direction would be to adopt it with the edits that have been made part of the motion.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm voting yes. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. And Public Member Robert Monson.
Monson, yes.
Thank you very much. And that passes unanimously.
Awesome. Thank you, Francesca. Now we will move on to the salary discussion. Since you were jumping in earlier, Hassan, I will let you start. Assuming Hassan's still here.
Thank you, Chair. I just, not specific to the comments, and I appreciate what the subcommittee, and I from day one here when I started, I said we're going to build a world-class organization where employees feel that they're working for an entity that compensates them with the market. And that should go for Mary and her staff. I think I'm not an expert in the market studies. I know I review them and I said take them to the board. But I think what Stuart went through is something I support. I think we shouldn't have anybody in the agency be paid less than the market. That's my statement. So I appreciate what the committee is trying to do, because whether it's my staff or Mary or her staff, I think we all deserve to be driven by the market. So that's my comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Hassan. So with that, we can go ahead and start taking some comments. Don't see anybody up on the board at this point, but I'll go ahead and make some comments as well. I mean, this is always an interesting and difficult and challenging topic to tackle. Generally, I would note that I appreciate the work that Stuart did around the presentation. And I think there's a whole different set of considerations on how we want to tackle this. I would note that generally, if you look at the boards that I sit on and the way that I actually operate and try to promote, one of the key principles and key focuses that I've tried to advocate for on most of the boards that I've sit on is to be careful that we're not promoting a culture or an environment where that further exacerbates the current ongoing problem that we have around executive compensation greatly outscaling the compensation of the other employees in an agency. And I have challenges internally if the typical employee in an agency is getting 2 to 3% raises per year, if the executive staff is getting 20% raises at one particular point in time or over time. It's just something that I think it's part of our role as public agencies with public dollars to try to fight that particular trend over time. So that's one context I would like to set. And reading the staff report, I do think it's interesting about the different salary compensations and ranges and where the IPA office is landed being at a director 2. Honestly, I don't remember how that came about. I don't even know how much input the board had on that. And I think that would be one area to potentially look into a bit further. I do think that if you look at the history of this with respect to the significant raises that were given at the executive level in calendar year 20, I believe it was, or 19, I mean, fiscal year 20, calendar year 19. That was actually one of the issues raised by the IPA's office, was that the possibility of those being inappropriate because they weren't done without a salary study. And so I'd have a little bit of trepidation of actually saying that we should do that for the IPA without a salary study. And I can tell you that it's probably a fairly likely outcome that if we were to do a salary study, we'd find in general that for that year, there probably wasn't on average a 20% increase in salaries for that type of position in the market in general. So without a salary study that indicates that it's truly important and truly a priority to raise salary to that particular level, it becomes challenging for me personally to say we need to take that big of a jump. And so those are just a couple things that come into mind as I'm debating where my position will land. I would also, make sure we're reflecting on that we make a recommendation. Obviously, the board's going to make a decision. So we need to make sure that, we should just keep that in mind from the perspective of whatever goes to the board is something that will come back and be reflective on how their opinion of this body operates, and make sure that we're comfortable and feel really well backed by whatever decision we make. With that, Paul, I see you're up on the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so glad you went first on this and had that point. I calculated it as about a 20.7 or nearly 21% salary increase. I'm very much inclined to take into account the sagacious comments of the executive director. That said, he knows better. Well, you and Mayor Vasquez are elected people. You know how hard it is to go to voters and say, give us $1 billion bond because we need to finance 21% salary raises for our executives, particularly in a year when we've got you know, all kinds of people in the restaurant and hospitality industries in San Diego, which are major industries in our community, that are laid off and they're on food stamps and looking for things. And so my reaction on this was, I'm going to separate. You can say a person is worth every penny of this amount, but you can then say, but all factors considered, that's just the newspaper headline that I would, you know, have a hard time going to a public meeting and have somebody say, well, how in the world could you have done that? So I would be inclined not to vote yes on the motion as if it was for that precise number, but rather to say that I would prefer just to have the Sandag board undertake a salary study. And because I think for us to just do it is, it's red meat to sharks, or whatever the phrase is. And I am so enthusiastic about the vision that we have of the 5 big moves. I think this kind of thing is what really can trip us up at the ballot box, and we need that $1 billion to get there. So anyway, my view is just to kick it to the board and with a recommendation of do a salary study. I recognize it's contrary to the hard work, which is appreciated, that the committee did. Bob and Stuart did great work. I don't want to diminish or demean that in any way. So thank you for receiving my comments, Chair Zito.
Chair Veto. Oh, that's interesting. Thanks, Paul, for the comments as well. And yeah, and I also appreciate you starting out the way you did, because I also want to say that, you know, sometimes I get, being a technical person, get really down into the details without thinking about the interpersonal things. And I want to make sure that I'm on the record saying I truly appreciate the work that Mary and her team are doing and the hard work that they're putting into it. And that's, you know, nothing that I'm saying is meant to reflect negatively on that. And it's more of just dealing with some of the realities that you talked about and that I talked about of what I think are important things. Before I make and try to drive to anything else, I don't see anybody else on the board. Does anybody else want to make some comment? Stuart.
Thank you. Just if I could, from an informational perspective, could somebody clarify where you know, this salary discussion side, where the whole discussion is vis-a-vis the next fiscal year budget, and what is or isn't included in the fiscal year's budget that the board, I think, has had a couple of discussions about, right?
Yeah, staff can help clarify if they can dig the numbers up. I think I ended up being a key player through a meeting a couple months ago that I sat in as an alternate for Mayor Hebner, where they approved on the order of a 2 to 3% compensation pool increase. Now, of course, that's going to vary by employee, but the overall pool, I believe, for compensation and bonus was 2 to 3%, but maybe staff could correct me if my recollection is wrong.
Zito, this is Melissa Caulfield. I'm the Director of Organization Effectiveness and oversee our Human Resources program here. So perhaps I can help with the questions. I think what you may be recalling is in the draft FY22 budget that the board is considering, staff had recommended a 3% salary adjustment pool for merit increases. And in conjunction with that, there's also a 1% compensation adjustment pool that anticipates base pay increases that might be needed with the current salary range study that staff are completing.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Although I actually think I was thinking of something else where we had actually changed the finances around to allocate money for those increases. But regardless, it was a rather contentious board meeting, but it passed. Anyway, but thanks for the clarification. So I think you have your number. It's in the 3% range is going to be the average, it sounds like, based upon the pool increases. Did that help, Stuart? Sorry.
Thanks for the clarification. I guess I was kind of, what I was leading to is, you know, what might have been built in. And I suppose that really gets to the salary table question, and the salary tables themselves have not specifically been reviewed. Is that right, Melissa?
That's correct, Stuart. We are, as I mentioned, we're just wrapping up a salary range study And the intention is to take the results of that study in the form of recommendations for salary ranges to the board for consideration when we take the final budget. And I believe that's scheduled for mid-May. So that's our current timing. Just wrapping up the recommendations at this point.
Thank you. The only thing I'd add if I could is, you know, I started off by saying that when one does this sort of thing, a salary study is exactly what one should do.
Correct.
We were given a mission without the capability of doing that. So if the consensus is that it's necessary to do, I certainly endorse that. A little bit contrary to the suggestion, I think Board Policy 39 references the fact that it is the mandate of the audit committee to make a compensation recommendation. So I would suggest that if we were given the resources and the time to do that salary study, that it should be overseen by this committee pursuant to Board Policy 39. And then just finally, Chair, going to your comments about the personal aspect of these things, we do just have the reality of Mary living with some now extended period of time without any certainty about what her compensation is likely to be. So if we were to go that route, I would just suggest that we do it in a very expeditious way.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that. Any other comments? Otherwise, you know, we can start playing the motion game, see if somebody can come up with a motion that'll pass. You know, my thoughts, again, recommendation is I don't know if the board will be so inclined to authorize a compensation study, and relative to your comments, Stuart, you know, it may come back right away. I do think that it's going to be unpalatable to actually give a very significant raise without such a study. I don't think the board will approve of such a thing. So, you know, we could go a couple different ways. One way, which is to say that, you know, just suggest that, you know, that the raise be in line with the other employees that are getting this year, including the executive staff, which is going to be 3% raise, but also then suggest that, you know, the board consider placing Mary on the pay scale, for lack of a better term, that is comparable to the other executives, as the point that you raised, and you know, see if that's a more appropriate place. Which then, if that happens, you know, when we come around next year, she would be in an entirely different pay scale and maybe merit a larger increase as well. But those are a couple thoughts. Happy to hear other people's thoughts as well. Oh, yeah, sorry, Paul, I see you come up.
Mr. Chair, I like that idea better. That,
Okay.
in other words, a reclassification of the position is a different animal altogether, because the salary just happens to follow whatever the reclassified position is. And that also is better for the incumbent, because then you tend to have a better runway looking forward. You're not always bumping up in the ceiling of a lower position, but you're in the mid-range, same money, but you're in the mid-range of a higher position. That's actually a better result for Mary or the incumbent. And if it is, I think that's less objectionable to the public. It's not a raise, it's a reclassification. So if you were looking for a motion, although we might have one from the committee that we should act on first, which is, you know, their recommendation, I will vote against it. But or if they're willing to not make that as a recommendation, my recommendation is we ask the board to consider reclassifying the IPA's position. So that would be a motion if it's appropriate to make one.
Yeah, it's certainly appropriate to make one. There is no other motion on the floor. I guess the question is, you know, relative to my comment, could still reclassify, but there still needs to be either a recommendation for the compensation increase this year or not. And so is that going to be part of your motion? Or, because again, I think
I would let the reclassification take care of it.
I think, well, maybe I'll let staff jump in. My belief is what would have to happen is the reclassification would have to happen at some point in the future. And then it would come back to us yet again to make a recommendation on the compensation based upon the reclassification, which would then go back to the board. And I don't know what timeliness may be assigned to that as well. So
Well, if it's reclassified, the compensation could be retroactive to the date of reclassification. My sense is that the reclassification does it. I would limit my motion to just that.
okay.
Chair
Okay.
I
Zito,
don't know
can
that
I
I
say
can get a
something?
second.
Sorry, yeah. Who was trying to jump in?
Can I say something? I'm a little.
Oh yeah, hey man.
Hi, I just want to ask the difference between a reclassification and moving me up in pay scale there versus the current IPA's pay scale approved by the board is already at 236. So I'm confused at the difference in that.
Okay. When you say the current IPA pay scale is already at 236, you're saying that's in with the range of the current pay scale, correct?
Yeah, board approved.
Right. Okay. But right. But it's within the range. And I think that the debate that you're hearing right now is a discussion of again, what is a merit increase versus an actual representation of the role that's being played and what is the correct compensation for that role. And I think what you're hearing behind that is, at least from some of the board members, and transparently myself included, is if we say that this is the role and this is the scope of that role, that it's difficult to justify a raise of that amount. I mean, I agree, and we agree that it is within the current pay range of the scale, but it's basically at that point saying that, based upon the factors that have been considered, a 20-some% raise is something that's easily defendable to the public and easily justified. Whereas if we say, well, actually the role was not classified correctly and it has this other scope, which has a different pay range associated with it, then you're not talking about actually saying that you're giving someone a raise for the same job scope. You're saying that the job scope is actually greater and should be recognized as greater and should be compensated accordingly. That is what turns into the difference. And it may be semantics, but unfortunately in the world that we're in, semantics are also very important. Stuart, did you put your hand up again? Or is your hand still up?
Yes, no, that's just a new point. So first, I don't know if y'all are familiar with a concept called framing. Framing is the notion that your perspective on something is dependent upon the way in the context in which it's being viewed, right? So, let's be real about the fact that we don't have a market study. We don't know what the market is. All we are reacting to is that for who knows what reasons, Mary's initial salary was $195,000. That's all we're reacting to, that 230, 240, 250. It sounds like a really big increase from 195. So we don't really know what the market is. And, I guess that's part of why I said I wanted to include in this the notion that when you go back to the initial salary study, the 195 seemed to come out of an aggregation of data that included agencies that were much smaller than Sandag. And that's why if you want to sort of, reframe your perspective on this, at a minimum, the 213 starting point is more reflective of what the median of billion-dollar agency IPA compensation was. But on top of that, you have to take into that 213 was a year old by the time Mary started. So we're all, and I'm sure I understand the reality, the board, the public, all these people, I share those same considerations about percentage increase for one person versus another. But all this is really getting muddied by the fact that we're referencing it against 195, when arguably the right starting salary could have been 215, 220 if we would have done a salary study in 2019 for billion-dollar agencies. And in that context, you know, if you were just to pick a number, you know, 240 today or next year relative to what might have been, you know, 215 or 220 back then, you know, that's a very different order of magnitude over the course of a 3-year increase, right? So I think it's helpful just to keep perspective on the framing of this at the same time that we're having this discussion. Thanks.
And Stuart? Let's see, any other comments from board members?
I don't think I'm going to get a second for my motion.
Yeah, I'm at this point, it seems like, well, once again, yeah, I don't
No, I
see
think it's
a
died.
second on the floor, so. But, so we would need someone to,
And I move the committee's recommendation with the comment that I will be voting no, but at least we'll get it out there and move it forward.
okay. So I have a second for that motion.
Well, if I can make an alternative suggestion that we acknowledge that there's not a consensus and that we recommend that we be resourced to do a salary study. And if the board says no, then, you know, I guess we can figure out how to move forward on that after that. But I mean, that actually reflects, I think, the sentiment, the real sentiment of what I'm hearing.
That's part of it. I still, sorry.
I've got a second motion that's going to die.
And maybe, unless, hey, Mayor Vasquez, did you want to jump in?
Yes, I have a question. How long would it take to do a salary study?
Vasquez, hi, thank you for the question. I was pondering that, right as you said the question.
How long would it take to do a salary study? I mean, if that would help to move the conversation forward in any direction, you know, maybe that's the tool that we need to help facilitate that conversation.
Mm-hmm. I would estimate it could take up to 3 to 4 months to do, depending on the upfront procurement of a consultant to do the work for us. So we can take a look and bring back more specific timeline, but I would imagine it would be maybe sometime in the summer that we would have that completed.
Yeah, I think that since we are dealing in such a difficult time right now, with all the challenges that we have in our society, really to move people with money, it's going to be a challenge. And if I were a genie and I could predict exactly what's going to happen, if this issue were to move forward to the board, it would die. And it would not have the support that it needs without data and facts. And the one thing that we need is data and facts to state the position and address the question of why is this needed? And so I hear 3 to 4 months. That's a significant amount of time in our world today. But unfortunately, I think it's necessary. And if we have the data and facts to support the 21%, then I mean, it's really hard to challenge that. So those are my thoughts regarding the issue. I know it's something, you know, when it comes to increases for those who work in government or are contracted to work in government, it's not an easy conversation to have these days. And so the only thing that I can think of to really help state our position would be to have a salary study in hand based on data and facts.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the comments. Bob, did you have some to add?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor Vasquez, for your comments as well. And I will admit to everybody, I've been struggling with this. Told Stuart this because I see on the one hand 20% increase. That's going to be a tough sell. Yet on the other hand, I see Mary in the last 3 years, she's not had a raise that whatsoever. And so I'm sympathetic towards that. I don't know if Melissa is still on the line, but is there any way to speed this up? If we were to say, let's do a salary study, is there any way we can shorten this so that it's not 3 to 4 months? Even though I understand that if we settle on a salary for Mary, it can go back in time to a date that we settle on. But that's what I wanted to kind of ask Melissa. Is there any way to speed that? Because I like the idea of doing a salary study. That does give us a good basis for moving forward. But at the same time, 4 months is a long time. And yet I understand too that we can move it back. So what do you think, Melissa?
Bob, I think the reason I'm just a little hesitant about being more firm in saying that it could be shorter is wanting to sort of consult with a few other folks in the organization about how long it takes to get a consultant on board to do this work. An option could be, Sandag does have a consultant currently under contract for on-call services. If the audit committee was open to engaging that firm to do the services, that could be one option for streamlining here. It would in fact be the same organization that did the study back in 2018, so CPS HR Consulting. And they are also, so again, currently the firm that we're working with, and they are conducting a current salary range study. If the audit committee was amenable to making them or utilizing that current consultant, that could be one way.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. So, I mean, to try to speed these along, I mean, given what I'm hearing, maybe we could just make a recommendation that we, just the recommendation that goes to the board is that we do a salary study as fast as we can, potentially using existing consultants or even in-house staff, if in-house staff is available, so that we can bring back a recommendation that is based upon that data, since we can't gain alignment around the subcommittee's current recommendation. That sounds
Chair
fair?
Vito, would you, if that was a motion, would you accept an amendment or a modification to a supplement that if the whatever compensation adjustment occurs would be retroactive to some date, for example, May 1st or something, so that if they do elect it, Mary would know that she would have the benefit of that adjustment backwards.
Thanks. Good
Chair
comment.
Zito? Yeah, Chair Zito, thank you. Actually, it's going to be retroactive back to January, just like all the other Sandag staff.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is I assume, yeah, I'm fully supportive of retroactive and into the whatever the procedures we're using for the rest of staff.
I wasn't aware of that, so then I don't need my modification. Thank you very much, Chair.
Mayor Vasquez, you had a comment, or did you want to make that as a motion, or what?
You know what? At this point, I can make that as a motion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Dostart seconds.
So we have a motion and a second. Appreciate that. I mean, for staff purposes, I do think you've had a lot of input. I'd also like to make sure that if the board approves it, what we would be looking for is a salary survey of comparable positions, both from the perspective of the size of the organization, to the extent possible, the geographic location of the organization, as well as the size and budget of the office itself. So I think those are 3 criteria that would be interesting to have. With that, please call for the vote. Oh, wait, sorry. I see Bob put his hand up again.
Yeah, Chair, just a quick question to make sure that I understand. on the salary study. Is this something that the audit committee is going to be involved with? I think Stuart had pointed this out, or is it something that HR Melissa's group is going to be?
I think we would be asking staff to conduct the salary study, which is why I was trying to make sure parameters got into the discussion around the motion.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I would just, again, for a point of clarification, is that making sure that whatever the salary study is based on, it's based on comparable agencies, because that's where we found the biggest discrepancy, Melissa, is that you're including, Sandag's $1 billion organization. And we should be comparing it to similar organizations of that size.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. The three things that I asked for were size of the agency, which is the point you just made, the geography to the best knowledge, in a similar price cost comparison geography. And the third one was the size of the office itself, because the size of the organization that you're actually running matters too. So those are the things I was asking for.
Yeah, Chair Zito, can I say something about the size of the office? I think
Right.
from an audit perspective, we have to realize that actually the size of the office, the smaller you are and the less resources you have, the more difficult and challenging you have and responsibilities, because you've got $1 billion agency and you only have 3 staff. That's actually more of a strain on staff and people running that office than having a staff of 20. So I hope that's considered.
I understand that. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
Okay. Mayor Vasquez, were you still up or your hand still up?
Oh.
Old or new?
Lower.
Okay,
Wait,
thank you.
sorry, wait a second.
With that,
Oh,
let's
okay.
call for the
There-
vote.
there it is.
Francesca?
Chair Zito, we do have a member of the public who raised their hand during the discussion. May I call on them first, or would you like to take that during continued public comments at the end?
Okay, well, we can take them, just understanding that generally I like to try to get all the public comment up front, but let's take them quickly.
Understood. Victor Calabrese, I see your hand up. We'll go ahead and give you access to your mic, and you can begin whenever you're ready. Victor, you're currently self-muted. If you'd like to speak, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, in the essence of time, I would suggest we'll move that to the public comment at the end. You can.
Okay.
We've got a
Thank you.
motion on the floor. So please call
All
for
right. Board Member Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Thank you. Board Member Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vice Chair Vasquez, yes.
Thank you very much. Public Member Paul Dostart.
Start, yes.
Public Member Stuart Halpern.
It looked to me like Stuart dropped off. This is Paul Dostart. He vanished from the screen. We might want to take Bob's vote first.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to Stuart. Public Member Bob Monson.
Monson, yes.
And I don't see Stuart on the line.
Stuart just sent me a message saying that he's having internet interruption. So.
Okay. Amberlyn, then I will mark him as absent for now.
Yes, we can mark as absent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, and that motion does pass with those members present.
Thank you. I do believe we're starting to run a little bit behind again. So we'll see what we can do on the next item. I believe the Office of Independent Performance Auditor update on audit review plan is next, and I'll turn that over to you, Mary, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. There was a request at the March 26th board meeting. Board member Chula Vista Mayor Mary Salas had requested that that the audit committee direct the OPA to perform an audit on SR 125. On the 26th, I also received a written request formally asking for an audit to be performed. After reviewing the request, I determined that a audit really wasn't necessary to answer the questions being asked of Mayor Salas. Rather, a review could be completed, and which takes a little less resources, And that could be done. And I estimated approximately 300 hours for that to be performed. With that, I am able, at the direction of the audit committee, to move hours around. I would prefer if it was an accepting of this review, that I was able to do it in these last 2 months. It works better because the new plan is coming. And as the new plan comes out, you know, I hopefully would like to stick to that plan. There have been some deviations from this plan as a result of a loss of staff, and also a redirection of our office doing process and control reviews versus full audits at this point in time. So we do have some flexibility to honor this request. I also wanted to provide a little bit of information on the current audit plan. We did have 403 hours kind of set aside to do these types of reviews at the board's request, to handle fraud, waste, and abuse investigations, and anything else at the executive director's request, et cetera. And some questions were asked, and I was able to go back and calculate based on the remainder of those hours around that category specifically. We do have a balance of 93.5 hours open to perform those types of requests. And again, with the redirection and all that of our current audit that we're doing, moving that into a process, we can work that 300 hours in, but it would really be up to the audit committee at this point in time. So with that, my request would be, at the direction of the audit committee, I would be able to allocate those 300 hours and perform that review.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary, and thanks for taking the due diligence to scope this out and recommend an alternative path as well. I appreciate that. Francesca, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Yeah, thank you. Paul.
Mary, did you have a personal recommendation on a professional recommendation? Do you personally have a professional recommendation?
Well, you know, like I said, I did look at it and did determine that it didn't require a full audit, that we could respond and answer those questions that Mayor Salas had brought up doing a review. But with that, it would still take an additional 300 hours. Now, keeping in mind that we're moving in this direction where we're looking at processes and controls, sort of the foundation of the organization, because we found that, you know, they hadn't been looked at, and really, instead of auditing, it's probably fair to go and really look at those processes and perform reviews on internal control and processes, and kind of build upon that. So it's, you know, doing this review, we might find that there are areas of improvement needed, right, as a result of not having those controls or not having those building blocks or processes. So just even if we did the review, it's really not, the review would result in almost an agreed upon procedure where I don't really give a recommendation or point anything out other than, here's the question asked, here's the results of that question. And then it really goes to the board for discussion on their own merit, not mine.
I guess, let me reframe my question with this background. Number one, I think we should be very responsive to elected board members in terms, if they have an issue, we really want to jump through flaming hoops for them. Number two, we have an audit plan that our committee adopted, which was our best thoughtful way of dealing with the most important priority items first. And there's, with all respect to 21 elected officials, there's something about having everybody throwing in, here's my little, you know, chestnut here to have you look at, that takes us off what we have determined on an overall basis is the wisest expenditure of funds. So maybe I can ask it this way to make me feel better about it, because I'm inclined to honor Mayor Salas's request. Could we justify in any way the thought that undertaking this Route 125 audit in some way helps us build the framework for this greater audit, the prioritized project?
No, absolutely. And that's what I was saying is that we can look at it that way, right? Is we can go ahead and be responsive to Mayor Salas's request. I do have even hours up to 100 hours almost that is for that purpose, still set aside and available. But also, like you said, Paul, and like I said earlier, is it could be a look at, here's a way to look at policies, practices, procedures, processes, and controls around that. And here's how we can improve based on this review we did as well.
Right. So we could even go a little higher than 300 because we're actually sort of like building an Excel spreadsheet. You spend a little bit more time to create formulas rather than plug numbers because you're actually building it to be used in the future. So it's worthy of that investment. And if that were the case, then I think it's a great idea to start the grander project and just have this particular incident be the prototype to see if it works. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Zito, for letting me have
Okay,
that
well,
conversation.
thank you for your comments. I see Bob's up. I'll just make one. So we stay on the same thread. I'll make one observation though, as being having been one of those board members in the past. And, I think one of the things we as a committee, and to frame this conversation, need to be cognizant of is what is the right priority? What are the right priorities of the things that we should be looking into, correct? Because I can guarantee you as a board member on Sandag, you wear two hats. You wear the hat of the membership of the agency, but you also wear the hat of the jurisdiction from which you're from. And if this audit committee very easily, or this audit and audit office could very easily get 19 individual requests for 19 different jurisdiction specific audits that should be done, which may not at all be aligned around what the overall board should be seeing. So I want to make sure as we hold the conversation around this request, it is definitely very much in the view of what the audit office was hoping to accomplish and what it has accomplished and what we trade off against it to make sure that it is fitting in the right priority. So I just want to make sure we're providing that context because while we do want to be responsive to the elected officials, we need to be more responsive to the board overall. So hopefully you appreciate that. Yeah, thanks. Bob, on to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And I'm just gonna I'm agreeing with what Paul and Chair you have said. I think we do have to pay attention to the board and their requests, and I appreciate Mary doing that. I also, and I know she's aware of this, we have to be careful though, because we do have an audit plan. But I know she's put hours in there that covers those surprise type things, but it would be very easy for Mary to start getting 19 different requests from board members. So I'm in agreement if we can, especially if we can tie it in to a larger project. That's a part of the plan. I think that's the best way to do it. But I just kind of wanted to throw that, and I'm glad other people have already put that out there. That is something we have to be cautious of. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Bob. Mayor Vasquez.
Yes, I just need a little patient here.
Oh my God, that's so nice.
Somebody's not muted. Sorry.
Oh,
No, go ahead, Mayor. Yeah.
Thank you. I just need a little bit of clarification here. If I can remember, Mayor Salas's request was in the spirit of identifying areas so that we could essentially pay off the cost of the toll road earlier than anticipated. That's what I thought the request was for. And I just wanted to get confirmation on that and/or, just kind of refresh my memory in terms of what the original request was.
Thank you. Mary, I guess you're probably the best person to answer and clarify specifics on the request.
Definitely, yes, you are correct, Vice Chair. That is the intent. That was her intent. That's what she's, hoping to do is look for an avenue or a way where cost savings, if there is any, could be assured and looked at. And if there was some, that would further provide opportunity to pay this off early, which would of course save Sandag a lot of money as well. So her request was really basically boiled down to look at all the costs that are going towards SR 125 and just make sure that they're appropriate, so that they're relative, that they're related, and that they're reasonable. And, you know, as I shared as an auditor, I can provide the information and say, here's what you ask and here's the results. Here's your questions being answered. But the reasonableness of that would then be up for discussion with the board, right? It would be, is this then reasonable based on Mary's results? And so that discussion would really be had with the board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I guess jumping in on that, Mary, just as a quick question, have we, I'm assuming since we haven't taken any action, we haven't had any at least directly fraud line reports on around how 125 is being treated, correct? There hasn't been somebody who's been accusing or claiming that there is some sort of fraud or waste that's happening here. This is just Mary's request to actually audit it and see that it is correctly handled. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Stuart.
Yeah, I apologize. I guess that computer virus or internet virus somehow mysteriously made its way over to me. I apologize for cutting out. Yeah, you know, in the spirit of that question, I was just going to ask, I don't know if there was someone from Mayor Salas's staff who was here to just walk through some of the background on that. I was curious as well how what the origin of this was and where it came from. But you know, I share, Chair, your thoughts here in terms of the prioritization and whatnot. One thing I was curious about, just from an informational perspective, I know that in the discussions about the fiscal budget and resources, I think there's some addition, Mary, to your staff that's planned, but I have a recollection that at one of the recent prior board meetings, somebody made a proposal to increase your staff even further than the current budget. Whatever happened to that? Do you know, what's the resolution? Because I think this does in fact relate somewhat to the capacity of your office to do these types of things.
That board meeting, I believe a board member during the discussion around the budget asked for me to get 3 positions versus 1 position, and it was a rejection. It was voted no.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was by board member Rodriguez, I believe.
Okay, well, hopefully everybody here voted in favor, but okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I got booted off the board this year. Just kidding. So I couldn't get a vote on it. That's now Mayor Lisa Hebner's role.
Well, I'm sure all the people asking for additional work probably vote in favor of additional resources too. But thanks
Awesome,
for
man.
clarification.
Yeah, I don't see other hands up yet. I guess a couple of quick questions, which I've already sort of seen some information on, just so it's out on the record. Mary, I believe you sent some information that said your original budget for this year of board member requests was 400 hours. You have 990 hours of that left is what you've been sharing with us today. My understanding of that 400 hours is that was based upon your original staffing plan, which didn't happen. So you may have less than half the staff that 400 hours was based upon. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's another good point is I actually do have less than half.
Right.
I only have 2 and I lost 1.
Right.
So,
yes. So my point being is that effectively you really have no hours. You have 90 hours of the original 400, which was based upon a staffing plan that never realized. And so from my perspective, it seems like you don't actually have the staff in hand. I'm struggling a bit because I appreciate your request and internalize your request about wanting to get it done sooner than later. But I also think, you know, and I also think that the more appropriate way to handle this, at least with what I'm seeing right now, is to say that we should be prioritizing this against the other things that we're doing, and your desire to look at the practices, policies, and procedures seemingly without other information is more important to what this committee's and your office has been asked to look at. But I'm open to other board members' conversations. But by doing that, that means that the end request would be for you to look at how Mayor Salas's request would end up in the context of next year's work plan and what would be prioritized and what would be fallen off based upon that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we delayed the review, I mean, I'm going to do whatever is at the direction of the audit
Right.
committee. Of course, it
Okay.
could be done, and I could move things around now. It could be done after we do some process and control reviews.
Mhm.
Either way, it could be done. I do have the letter in front of me, and really the purpose and intent, she specifically states, is this is asked to be done as part of the efforts to find possible additions or savings of monies to help pay off the bond debt and ensure that the monies are being spent, sent back to the fund. And also paying the debt off sooner would save Sandag $12 million in operational costs, eliminate the need for a $90 million on unnecessary tolling system upgrades, and pass minor maintenance costs of about $2 million annually. So she's pretty specific in performing this. She believes there would be a huge savings if there were to find some savings in that.
Right. Yeah, we just don't know. Again, the result of this would be moving money from one bucket to another bucket. So we don't know what the outcome of that would be, right? So
Right.
it might be fine savings here, and it might mean that the Mid-Coast Trolley project isn't paying its fair share in a certain area, and suddenly that project gets slowed down. So we really don't know what the trade-off is. We just know there would be a trade-off if something came up. And apologies, I'm not quite sure whose hand went up first, or Stuart, you're still up from before, or
No,
I'll go.
well-
Mayor Vasquez, you go ahead.
Yes, thank you so very much. And so I do have one question here. As agenda item number 6, it says discussion and possible action. Are we going to take action with this particular agenda item today?
Well, I would say it's up to us whether or not we take action.
Yeah.
That's based upon what we decide. If we think, the way I see it is we can either suggest that Mary, the auditor, go ahead and book those 300 plus hours to do Mary, the mayor request, or Mary Salas's request to review, or we could say, ask this to be incorporated in next year's plan as opposed to this year's plan, or we could say that we don't think it's, direct her to actually not do it, or we could just not take a vote. But that last part seems irresponsible. We should have a position on this, and so we should try to take some action.
Thank you so very much. I think that while we are at the end of the FY and there are hours that are available that have not been used, perhaps Mary can use those hours to, move forward with the I don't know, what do you want to call it? Is it an audit?
It's a review. It's a review.
Move forward with the review. And so if I could make a motion to do so, whatever that proper motion is, I support the effort of moving forward with the review, utilizing the 300 hours that were specified in agenda item number 6.
Okay, thank you. Somebody just buzzed. I don't know if that was me. Anyway, I believe, Stuart, you are up next. I don't know if you're planning on seconding, but we should decide if we have a second for the motion.
Well, before that, I had just a couple of informational questions, and I apologize, I did get cut out, so maybe this has been covered. But, Mayor Salas's letter makes some very compelling arguments as to the potential benefit of this. I mean, unquestionably very compelling benefits. Is there any sense of the probability of realizing any of those benefits just from the assessment that you, Mary, have done so far? Because then we're sort of in the land, I think, Chair, that you've raised, which is, there are those benefits versus what if the efforts were expended someplace else. So that's part one, is whether you have any sense at all as to the prospects of realizing those benefits from the review.
Based on what she's asking, the question she's asking regarding the review, I haven't done any type of assessment around those matters. So I could not tell you if it might be fruitful or not.
Chair Zito, can I also add to that?
Sure.
The major savings would be in two areas. The sooner the road is paid off, the sooner we can stop putting money aside to repave it and maintain it and operate it and things like that. And so that's a large savings because we have to put money aside just to, let's say, repave the whole thing every 10 or 12 years. So the assumption would be Caltrans would pick up that cost. That is an assumption because they would have to agree to that because that's not what the current franchise agreement says. But still, that's the assumption. The second assumption is if we pay it off sooner, it becomes a free road and the tolling system does not have to be replaced because the tolling systems are only last so many years. And so we have to put money away every year to buy a new tolling system like we're installing now after 12 years or so that the road's been open. So those are the two biggest savings areas if we can pay it off sooner. So it's not that there's, because I talked to the mayor, and I think, Mary, you talked to the mayor also separately. Mm-hmm. And it's not that she has identified something. It's like, ooh, look into this. It's just that please validate this because if we pay it off sooner, we don't have to buy another expensive tolling system.
Yes, that is her desire. She's hoping to look at every avenue possible to make efforts to get things paid off and save, operational cost, bond debt cost, and it's quite a bit of it. So yeah, that's her intent.
Yeah, for clarity, what the real cost savings is to the users of the road, right? Because all those costs are covered by the toll revenues. So it's not direct. So if this happens, I believe the end result is to remove the tolls, which will remove the revenue, which is paying for those costs. So it won't be any more money to Sandag. It will be money, very important money, but it'll be money to the users of that road who won't have to pay tolls anymore. That's the intent.
I just had a second part to the question. And again, I apologize if you covered this, but Mary, when I came back when you were discussing the fact that practically speaking, you really don't have hours because you've got reduced staff, you've used up most of the budget for this type of thing. Just for absolute clarity, would it be like, yes, you can do it, but like people would have to defer their vacations and stuff like that in order to get this done?
So, we lost resources and we've deferred vacations for the last 2 years. I have for almost 3 years. So, that's such as life. But what I did is, I had a conversation with my two staff that I have, my 1.5 staff, and told them, we can do this. But are you planning? So we have two things. We have planned training that we have to delay, which we can do. That's possible. And vacations, and they both agreed that there would be no need to take a vacation in May, June. So they were okay with it. And of course, I care most about my staff and that they can keep going. So I did talk with them, and yeah, so we can do this with either any balance that we have in moving around commitments and time off and stuff like that, so that we can get it done.
Thank you, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Paul?
Yes, I didn't hear a second to Mayor Vasquez's motion. If she would permit me to, I would offer an amendment to which I would second your motion, Mayor. And it would be that we instruct IPA to undertake this review and to incorporate it into the planning and process audit that is to start very soon in the next fiscal year.
The only thing we can do that, Paul. The only thing I don't want to do is derail my my savings of right now. As we shared in the past committees, we're doing a contract and procurement audit, and the start of it, we started to look at vendors, and so we don't want to. Our moving in from the process and control review is with vendors, and so that's almost putting a pause on that to jump into something completely different.
Well,
so,
it would be to incorporate it into the process and control the bigger scope of that review if she accepts that amendment.
We would definitely be able to look at and incorporate anything around process and controls that we do on her review into our review of process and controls. But our process and controls that we'll be looking at on the onset would be a continuation of the audit that we're doing right now, so we don't lose that work done.
Yeah.
And that's around vendors, which really hasn't anything to do with SR 125. Unless there's vendors involved, right? Unless there's contractors involved, then that would touch on that.
Yeah, and then this would permit this committee, including those associated with the motion, to correctly state that we have, if your review affirms Mayor Salas's comments, to properly state that we've saved the road users literally millions of dollars, as well as Sandag in the future.
Or we can take the 100 hours, even though Councilmember Chair Zito is correct. It's not really 100 hours, but because it got sliced in half. But if we could even take 100 hours to start the review and then plan and incorporate 200 hours into the new plan to finish the review.
I'm with that all the way. If you are, Mayor Vasquez, would you accept that amendment?
I can accept that amendment.
Then I second the motion as amended.
Okay, so for, and Mayor Vasquez, I see your hand is still up. I don't know if you have more to say or, okay, thanks.
My hand is down.
For clarity, the motion that's on the floor is to move ahead with the review request. 100 hours of it would be used this year, and then the additional time needed would be moved into next year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And okay, with that, any other comments or discussion? I'll call for the vote. Francesca?
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Thank you. Board Member Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vasquez.
Thank you. Public Member Paul Dostart.
Dostart, yes.
Thank you. Public Member Stuart Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
Thank you. And Public Member Robert Monson.
Monson, yes.
Thank you very much. And that does pass unanimously.
Thank you. Not being able to easily make progress on chatting with staff behind the scenes, I'm curious if anyone has an opinion on whether 7 or 8 is more important. If we start losing numbers in 2 minutes, should we shift things around or just keep going as usual? Anybody have an opinion on staff?
Mary, I was going to ask what you think about item 7.
I'm sorry, I got turned around there. I think if we can do, I think the CAP review is important to discuss.
Okay.
It talks about the accomplishments that they've done on the corrective action plan, and that's important.
Yeah, I would concur. I just wanted staff input. So we'll just continue to go through the agenda, realizing it's possible we may lose a quorum by the time we get to number 8. We'll see. Okay, let's start with number 7 and Mary, or is it Melissa?
That would be Melissa.
Melissa, yes.
Thank you, Chair Zito. And so again, Melissa Kaufeld, your Director of Organization Effectiveness, and try and zoom through this presentation, recognizing that we're a little short on time today. So I'm representing the Sandag management team this afternoon. We're presenting our first quarterly update on the compensation audit action plan. This was intended to be a brief presentation and really just recap a little background on the plan, as Mary mentioned, some of the work that's being completed, and then to let you know what's ahead. The action plan, we included that as attachment 1 to your staff report. It was developed by management last fall in response to the OIPA's salary and compensation compliance audit. The plan incorporates direction that the Board of Directors provided, as well as recommendations that had been provided by this audit committee. And we also had consulted with Mary and her team in putting together the plan. And after review by the audit committee and at your recommendation, the board approved the action plan last November. The plan's comprehensive. It has 27 actions within it. Some of these actions are for board consideration. Others are for management action and will take place over an 18-month period. As part of the plan, management committed to providing regular updates. And as I noted, this is our first update to you this afternoon. And to help communicate the status of these 27 action items, we have gone ahead and included in the front section of the plan document what we refer to as a progress at a glance summary. And this is intended to be a visual reference to help illustrate which items have been completed, which ones are underway, which ones haven't been started. And I just wanted to take a quick moment here to acknowledge the team who are working on the plan, colleagues from the Office of General Counsel, from the Finance Department, and of course, in my department, Rachel, our HR manager, and Maria, our risk manager. And also want to just extend a huge thank you to Mary and her team for the ongoing guidance, the consultations, collaboration that we've in how we've worked together to sort of ensure our success over the last couple of months. So just moving to what's been accomplished, what's been postponed. There were 3 actions that were due in the first quarter of 2021. And as you've seen in the staff report.
Melissa, just to be sure, are you intending to share anything? Because nothing's sharing right now. Okay.
Nope, just me.
Okay, just checking. Okay, just talking through it. That's fine. Sorry to the interruption.
No, that's okay. So I mentioned 3 items were due in the first quarter of this this calendar year. 2 have been completed, 1 has been postponed. The postponed item is action 4.1, and this was board approval of a special compensation policy. And this one we have now postponed to be completed by June 30th this year. With this particular action item, we had initially identified the timeline to coincide with resolution of an audit that had been conducted by CalPERS last year. And after working closely with CalPERS to resolve that audit, the plan that was put in place for addressing those audit findings did not require the board's adoption of a special compensation policy by the end of February. Now, that said, management is still intending to take that special comp policy to the board for consideration. And the timeline that we have identified is to take that special comp policy to the board in conjunction with their consideration of the FY22 program budget. And that is currently agendized for May 14th next month. With respect to completed items, 2 completed items that I'm happy to tell you just a little bit about. One of these is action 1.4. This one had to do with employee acknowledgement of the handbook and state ag bylaws. The second is action 5.6. This one is employee acknowledgement of board policies number 41 and 42. Because of the similarity in nature of these 2 items, we completed them concurrently, and we timed these to occur with the release of the annual employee handbook, which happened in January. And I'm pleased to say that given the success and efficiency of these new processes, management has established these as a new practice and intends to repeat these on an annual basis going forward. So just some highlights from the work here, 3 sort of categories of, if you will. We spent some time focused on communicating the new requirements with employees, establishing new processes, as well as documenting our processes. So the communication component included updating our employee handbook with the new requirement, getting that new language with employees when the handbook was released. We've also updated the offer of employment letter that we provide to new employees so they are aware of the acknowledgement process at the time of hire. And we also established a new intranet portal for employees that provides reference materials about the acknowledgement process, as well as links to the handbook, the bylaws, and board policies. With respect to the practices that we've established, we went ahead and created a new web-based form to capture digital acknowledgements from employees. So this was part of our efforts to be both efficient and effective. The form was designed and programmed to send periodic reminders to employees who hadn't responded. So it auto-nagged, if you will. And then the form was also designed to populate a report that summarizes the date and time of the acknowledgement, as well as the name, the title of each responding employee. And once the acknowledgement process was completed, Human Resources downloaded that compiled report and is keeping that as part of their records to fulfill the record keeping component of this process. The report that I referenced was included as attachment 4 to your staff report. So you have that as an example. And then finally, we spent some time really documenting the procedures here. Again, attachment 3 to the staff report is a new procedure guide that the Human Resources team has put in place to describe or that incorporates the processes related to acknowledgement. The document, the procedure guide, we intend to review and update that as needed, certainly on an annual basis when we undertake the acknowledgement process each year. I believe when Mary speaks to you in just a couple of minutes, she'll talk about her review and assessment of the new practices that we've put in place. And just before I wrap up here, would just like to say a couple of things about what's coming up. I mentioned the plan is comprehensive in nature, 27 action items. And while we've talked about 3 of those today, I did want to bring to your attention that there are 10 items that are due for completion by the end of June. And I believe they're all marked as currently underway in that summary. The items that are underway relate primarily to the board's adoption of the FY22 program budget, and again, expected to occur next month, as well as the board's review and consideration of updates to the SANDAG bylaws and board policies. And this is work that Amberlyn is leading and is currently expected to be completed in the early part of June. So when Amberlyn, Andre, and I are intending to come back to the audit committee in July to provide you with updates on those 10 currently underway actions and let you know about our work at that time. But for today, this concludes my presentation, and I'm available as well as the team members who have been working on the plan if you have any questions. Thank you, Chair Zito.
Thank you, Melissa. Any questions of Melissa from board members? Seeing none at this point. Mary, did you have anything you wanted to add? Nope. You're muted, Mary.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll move to 7B, which is just the type of review we did.
Okay, great.
OPA's responsibility, of course, is to review the corrective action plan on a quarterly basis. That's part of our goals and achievements for the office. And it really is on the basis of the actions that are due and the time constraints provided by the corrective action plan according to management and approved by the board. In this case, in November 2020, a review was performed and the board adopted a corrective action plan. So the review this time consisted of really only one item, well, 2 items. One of the items that was due was postponed, and Melissa shared that with you, and I believe that that was a reasonable postponement. We'll look at that in June when the corrective action plan comes due for the next quarter. So I concur with that. The other 2 items, as Melissa shared, was basically employee acknowledgement of the employee handbook, which had been updated to include communication, acknowledgement, record keeping, and that was well documented within that document. And then the other part was updating the employee agreement and also sending out acknowledgement around that they did read it and did obtain it and somewhat understood it. And so how I tested that last part was really when I received the invitation to acknowledge, I ignored it. I ignored it several times. And what I was hoping to see is a response back to me to remind me that I needed to do it every time. And so there was a deadline date that was given, and I ignored that deadline date, and I wanted to see yet a final reminder, and I did see that. And I went and acknowledged it, and then for vouching that, I asked them for their records that documented that everyone had acknowledged, and they did provide that with me, a record keeping of the employee, the title, the date stamp when they acknowledged it in time, and also with the exception of 2 individuals who had not returned back to work, all of them had acknowledged it. So that test of control somewhat was present in there. So the next review will be in June, and there'll be a lot more, as Melissa shared, about 10 items. So there'll be a lot more testing that will come up in that review, a lot more detailed testing around controls, documentation, sufficient records, examples, et cetera, that we'll be looking at. That's all.
Thank you, Mary.
Sure.
Francesca, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Great, thanks. Any board member comments? I will just say again, thank you both to Melissa and Mary. It's great to see that we're staying on top of this. But I won't be letting you slip for future milestones. So let's see if we can hit the rest of them. Yeah, although it's understandable why we missed the first one. Okay. We then move on to item number 8, the draft.
It looks like Stuart has a question there.
Oh, sorry,
Chair Zito.
Stuart came in.
Yep, sorry for coming in late there, but just quick question or comment. You know, I really, really appreciate the comprehensive nature of the attachments. Immensely helpful for oversight. I'm curious, is the degree to which it looks like those things are prepared by hand, and hopefully not just for this committee, but rather they're being used for yourselves internally. I'm curious if there's any prospect of actually creating any kind of online, dashboard-like capabilities to assist you in the monitoring of the oversight, as well as to assist the responsible parties in their monitoring and tracking their progress. Thanks.
Stuart, thank you for the comment. And to clarify, you're referring to the progress at a glance summary?
Well, really both. There are the 2 parts, the progress at a glance. I mean, really a fabulous presentation, at least from my point of view, to quickly, see what's going on. But then the greater detail, I would hope that that's not something that you're doing just for our committee, but rather is a tool that your office is using. And again, ongoing, I'm wondering, Mary, if generally in doing these corrective action plans, there's the capacity budget to actually do these things in a little bit more of a user-friendly online basis, so it doesn't, create a lot of work for people.
We could, we can set up so we do the corrective action plan and we track it. And then we, of course, as you're aware, last year, we give you that very detailed report of all. And that took a lot of effort and work from my staff. It took us a long time to do that. We went through and pulled all the audits that had done in the last 5 years on Standag from everywhere, not just our office. And we consolidated them. And then we now have them on an Excel. Really, it's a smart sheet, which is an excellent tool. I love smart sheet, by the way, and I encourage management to look into that. But really, it's an interactive tool where you can actually have it available online for people to check in and look, even the public, to check in and look and see where that status is. And we track our corrective action plan summary that we provide to the audit committee on a smart sheet. And we update that continuously when management provides us with another audit that they performed. And then we keep track of our own audit on that. So that's an ongoing updated item. So I think I can certainly share a smart sheet with Melissa and the group and help them get that onboarded. And it would be a great tool for them to, share this really great work and everything that was done. Even with the public, they could, like I said, put that as a dashboard on the website.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it could be used as a extra credit for transparency score on in the future, if possible. Thanks. Okay, with that, we'll go on Well, first, just confirm with Francesca. It looks like we still have a quorum at this point.
Yes, we do, Chair.
Go on to item number 8. I will just warning that I actually have a hard stop at 3, so that'll certainly end it if we're still going at that point. But let's start with item number 8. So, and I'm trying to remember who was.
I think it's me, Chair Zito.
I think it was either Kathy or Leanne.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And good afternoon, members of the Audit Committee. I'm Kathy Brady, a partner with Schoberg Evesham Consulting, and I'm here with Leanne Liu, a director with our firm. And we're pleased to present the results of our TransNet Triennial Performance Audit. Realizing it's Friday afternoon and we're past your time, we'll do our very best to be brief. I have just a few comments before I turn it over to Leanne, who will discuss the key audit results and recommendations. And then I'll be back to wrap up with a summary of next steps. So I don't know if someone is controlling these. Thank you. That works. So as you may know, the ordinance requires ITALC to conduct performance audits, as well as establish the audit scope, which it has done over the years and has included and focused on a variety of different areas since the first triennial performance audit that was done in 2008. For this current fiscal year 2021 performance audit, ITALC hired our firm, Schoberg Evesham Consulting. Our firm was established more than 21 years ago by the former California State Auditor, and we specialize solely in public sector audits and consulting. In addition to a variety of government service areas, we have extensive expertise and experience in transportation and transit programs, capital project delivery and management, and construction financing. As required by the triennial audits, our firm follows GAGAS, which you are familiar with, or the Yellow Book. And as you know, they provide a great framework for auditors to ensure objectivity, integrity, and quality. And we follow all the same standards that Mary does, requiring independence and ethics and gathering sufficient evidence to support our results. So complying with these standards through the triennial performance audit just provides that another level of accountability and truly focuses on trying to help government officials have better information for decision making and have more effective operations. Next slide, please. So for the fiscal year 2021 triennial audit, we focused on the period between July 1st, 2017 and June 30th, 2020. We did consider information through February of this year when we wrote our draft audit report. So as you can see on the slide, we were tasked with 10 focus areas. The first area, project delivery, we looked at major corridor construction, what's been done to date, what remains. We looked at program management at the ordinance level, as well as compliance with the ordinance. In the fourth area, fiscal responsibility, we reviewed financial models and fiscal safeguards. Another area we reviewed was transparency and accountability through the plan of excellence and progress on TransNet, as well as in the sixth focus area, following up on prior audit recommendations, status, corrective action. So a seventh area was related to the AB 805, which was discussed earlier in your meeting, the 2017 legislation that changed a lot of things, including board composition and weighted voting structure. The eighth area was a deep dive into safety. We looked at bicycle and pedestrian performance only for this audit. There were some negative trends on the prior audit, as well as looked at emergency planning and system capacity. We did a deep dive into area 8 on the bike early action program, looking at status, schedule, and cost. And finally, we looked at ITALC itself, focusing on qualification categories, member terms, recruitment, selection, and conflicts of interest. Next slide, please. So before Leanne describes the audit results and recommendations, I just wanted to call your attention. We have a 2-page at-a-glance executive summary that we provided at the very beginning of the report. Too small to read on the screen, but the intent was just to quickly provide a reader with the critical recommendations and key results from each report chapter. And we prioritized our recommendations as critical, high, medium, or low based on the impact to TransNet's goals or functions, critical path activities, accountability, or any time sensitivity of a particular recommendation. Something else to remember or know is that in several audit areas, they were still fluid and changing during our process, specifically as it related to the in progress 2021 Regional Transportation Plan. So that meant financial projections were being updated, direction for remaining TransNet projects was still undecided, and even performance measurement activity was tied to or waiting for that revised RTP. So we based our conclusions on the information that we had available at the time, knowing that it could, possibly change once that 2021 RTP is finalized. Overall, we found SANDAG and its partner agencies have made great progress and completed many planned projects. Although the bike EAP projects will likely not be completed as expected. We found SANDAG was generally compliant with ordinance provisions, strengthened financial models and controls, and realized some improved bike and pedestrian safety in the region. As Leanne will expand on, we also identified areas for improvement related to reporting against ordinance goals. You talked about transparency earlier, enhancing quality control documentation, and implementing changes for the bike EAP project permitting practices. So with that quick summary, I'll turn it over to Leanne to walk you through the details.
Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, members of the Audit Committee. Next slide, please. In Chapter 1, we discussed the implementation status of the Major Corridor Program and the improvements that were envisioned by the TransNet Extension Ordinance in 2004. The main takeaway is that with only 16 years of the 40-year TransNet program passed, many projects were already completed or are in progress. But for the projects that are not yet done, ITOC and the SANDAG board need to know, as they're moving forward with the 2021 RTP and making decisions about what to fund, that there is this portfolio of outstanding TransNet projects that needs to be addressed. And what we mean by that is, with all the changes and the new vision for the region, SANDAG needs to be clear on whether these TransNet projects will be considered in the 2021 RTP or canceled because they may no longer be the best option or addressing the region's current needs. In order to do that, and when moving forward, SANDAG needs to crosswalk the major corridor projects from the ordinance to current status, at least annually, so that decision makers and the public can better align past promises with current accomplishments or future goals. Next slide, please. Chapter 2 discusses SANDAG's fiscal responsibility as it relates to its financial planning to make sure there is funding available to pay for all TransNet programs and projects. In past triennial performance audits, we have delved into SANDAG's revenue forecasts, so the focus this time was on assessing controls and financial models SANDAG has put in place to address past shortcomings. With the renewed focus and improved fiscal safeguards functioning as intended, more light was shed on funding challenges that are not entirely new or a big surprise to SANDAG, but it did make the $9.8 billion funding gap for the major corridor projects more visible. And so with that in the future, SANDAG really needs to develop and adopt a formal process where any of these identified issues are discussed and options are outlined to show any impacts this may have on what is left to do for TransNet. Of importance with that is for SANDAG to clearly communicate how these decisions are made, especially when options to reduce, change scope, delay, or even eliminate projects are being evaluated. Next slide, please. Compliance, transparency, and accountability are key in government. And as discussed in Chapter 3, we found that SANDAG staff demonstrated commitment and were focused on compliance with ordinance provisions. That in particular shows with how SANDAG tracks and makes progress on addressing prior audit recommendations. But a key area where we found that SANDAG could do better is in the reporting on actual progress made on projects, especially status as it relates to details on cost, schedule, scope, and accomplishments overall, and how those align or do not align with what the ordinance promised. Next slide, please. Among the many changes at SANDAG over the past few years, AB 805 was a very visible one, as it did affect the SANDAG board composition and its voting structure. We did not focus on the subjective impact of the AB 805 changes, such as member interactions, Rather, our focus was on empirical data we could assess and determine whether weighted votes impacted the delivery of TransNet programs and projects. And so, as discussed in Chapter 4, in relation to how AB 805 impacted TransNet, we found that the change in board composition and the weighted voting did not significantly change the delivery of TransNet programs and projects. In fact, we found that the weighted vote option was only exercised 12 times over the last 3 years and only changed the outcome of the tally vote 3 times for TransNet related items. And so there were no audit recommendations in this chapter. Next slide, please. The last triennial performance audit and the 10-year look back review of TransNet had identified a negative trend for bicycle and pedestrian safety. And so this time, ITALC had asked us to follow up to see how trends evolved over the last 3 years. As discussed in Chapter 5, the good news is that there were fewer bicyclists and pedestrians injured or killed between 2015 and 2018. But aside from bike and ped safety, we were also asked to conduct a deeper dive into regional safety planning efforts, especially as it relates to emergency evacuation or capacity planning for safety hazards. And what we found is that, like its peers, SANDAC did not get very much involved with emergency evacuation or capacity planning, although there was activity at the state and local jurisdiction level. But in terms of general regional safety planning, there were peers that employed several good practices, such as designating a staff to coordinate safety planning for the region. And also, some peers had actually developed safety plans that looked at crash data, discussed targets, and described how efforts support and are coordinated with statewide DOT plans. So we recommend that SANDAC look into these items to further strengthen focus on TransNet safety goals. Next slide, please. Chapter 6 focused on the Bike Early Action Program, which was approved by the SANDAC board in 2013 and set aside $200 million to fund several bike capital improvements over a 10-year timeframe. That deadline is coming up in 2024, and with only a few years left, it is not likely that the program will be completed as intended based on the data we reviewed during this audit. Some of the delays and challenges with the program are not within SANDAC's control, such as permitting delays with the City of San Diego. But what is also important to note is that SANDAC needs to more clearly and comprehensively communicate these delays, project status, and cost information against plans and expectations so that ITALC and the board can make informed decisions about how to move the program forward. To be able to do that, SANDAC staff should more clearly, in its reports to ITALC and the board, present progress in terms of cost, schedule, and miles completed in relation to what the Bike EIP has set out to accomplish, and be very clear if those goals are still realistic or need to be adjusted based on where the program is today. Next slide, please. Lastly, as required by the ordinance, each performance audit also looks at ITALC and any practices that could be improved. Overall, the TransNet ITALC is a very robust committee with qualification and expertise requirements that are similar to others. But since the world has changed since the ordinance passed almost 20 years ago, there might be additional expertise categories, such as public transit users or performance measurement knowledge, that could be considered. Especially as TransNet improvements evolve, additional expertise in areas that are contemporary with the latest in transportation planning and development could strengthen ITALC's oversight role. We also recommend that SANDAC could be more clear in recruitment efforts and materials about its conflict of interest policy, and in more detail describe to prospective ITALC candidates how a potential conflict of interest does not mean that the candidate is automatically precluded from joining the committee. And before we take your questions, I'd like to turn it back over to Kathy for next steps. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Leanne. As you can see on this slide, this is the third presentation of the draft audit report. So after today's discussion, we will present the final report to the ITALC on June 9th, and then to the board at the end of June. So before we wrap up, just real quickly, wanted to thank SANDAG and the TransNet partners who were extremely helpful and receptive throughout the audit, as well as the ITALC audit subcommittee that provided great insights during the audit process. Thank you for sticking with us to the end of our presentation today. And this concludes the presentation, and I'll hand it back over to Chair Zito.
Thank you, Kathy and Lan. Appreciate it. I've had the pleasure of seeing it twice now, but maybe I'll avoid asking the same questions I did last time. See if anyone else has any questions. Do we have any members of the public wanting to speak, Francesca?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Any board member comments or questions? Or is everybody wanting their Friday afternoon beer or something? Yes, I see no comments and questions. You must have done an excellent job, answered all the questions and comments up front. But I said I won't belabor the questions I had at the Transportation Committee by asking them again. Thanks for the great presentation. With that, we are moved on to continued public comments. I know we had the one person that wasn't able to speak during the compensation item. Are they still here, Francesca?
No, they've since put their hand down.
Okay. And so then we're moving to upcoming meetings. The next committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, May 28th at 12:30 p.m. I will once again strive to do better at time management, but we'll see what we can do. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. We're adjourned. Thank you.